Hi, this is Andy McDonald, and welcome to the Informed Performance Podcast. On today's episode, I speak to the incredibly open and honest Ed Lee, the rehab and strength and conditioning coach at Harlequins Rugby. On this episode, Ed very generously deconstructs the Harlequins approach to strength and conditioning with absolute transparency. If you've been enjoying the podcast, then please get behind us and subscribe or share the show amongst your network. The better supported we are, the easier it is for us to continue providing what we're doing. In the meantime, I hope you enjoy this very open conversation from Ed Lee and myself on the Quins way of doing things. Hi Ed, thanks for giving up some time and coming on the show today. How are you, mate?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Just for the listeners' benefit, could you just outline your background and what you've done and where you are now?
Yeah, of course. So about 10, 11 years ago, I did a full-time internship at Harlequins Rugby. So that was my first exposure completely to any form of strength and conditioning. I had a sports science degree from Cardiff University, well, formerly UWIC, but Cardiff University. And at the time, I actually had no idea really that this position or this job existed. I just thought I was very naive. I just thought rugby players did it themselves. And then I actually was towards the end of my university career or degree, I met a couple of the strength coaches that looked after our team and kind of got me interested in it. I still didn't think I wanted to do it as a job. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, so I kind of took a bit of time out and then actually ended up working as a personal trainer at Fitness First and got offered from there an internship with Harlequins. Fitness First were opening up a facility that Harlequins were going to. And I must say I went into it fairly blasé. I thought, I'll give this a go. I'm really interested in fitness. I'm a big rugby fan. I'll see how this goes. And about 2 or 3 months in, I was hooked and I knew this is what I wanted to do as a job. So I did a full year with them, so a full season. Then finished with them. I was wildly underexperienced. That was my first year. So I didn't even approach any of the coaches there to ask for a job. I just thought, right, this is my chance to go off. And now with this small amount of experience under my belt, go and get a decent job in strength and conditioning. So I then I had maybe like a 4 or 5 month sabbatical where I did a fight camp for a fighter in Bellator, BAMMA. So, which is the UK, like a lower level UK version of the UFC. And the fight camp went amazing. And then he got knocked out in 30 seconds. So that was me thinking, right, MMA is maybe not the sport I want to be involved in. And then literally 2 days after that had happened, I applied for a job at London Broncos as the lead for their academy strength and conditioning. Got that job, which was brilliant. So did two and a half seasons there as lead for the academy and assistant for the seniors. And then during the third year, I got offered a role, just a 1 season, so like an 8-month role in New Zealand for a rugby team called Northland. So in the ITM Cup, which is the provincial cup that the players go into after the Super Rugby, as an assistant under a guy called Tim Hurst, who's now Waikato head of performance, and did 8 months there. And I was getting towards the end of that, and then I got offered a job back at Harlequins as head of academy S&C from 20s down. So not the senior academy, but just from 20s down. So took that and literally spent maybe 1 season as the academy S&C and then moved up into the seniors. And now it's been 7 years or so at Harlequins. So yeah, so I'm in my 6th season, 6 or 7, it all blends into one. And so now I am co-lead with Gaz Tong, who's our head of performance, co-lead of the back speed, power and strength development, along with a guy called James Wild, who programs our speed. And then I run the long-term injured for all the backs. So essentially anybody that's injured for longer than 6 weeks, I take them on from there. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
And had you stayed in touch with Harlequins when you were off, working with fighters and working in New Zealand? Were you regularly in contact with the club anyway?
I mean, yeah, I was really fortunate that actually I made some very good friends during the internship. And Gaz Tong, who was an assistant strength coach at the time, I stayed in contact with him and the head of performance at the time, who was a guy called John Dams, and they moved through. So when the position came available, I think they obviously want somebody in that they can trust, and then you could do a decent job. So then that's where that came from. And as you know, within this industry, it's all about who you know as well. So that I was fairly fortunate with that. So yeah.
It sounds like you've got quite a similar sort of entry into the industries. I mean, I worked in the fitness industry and then interned at Bristol Rugby quite a few years ago. You've still got you're still in the scene. And how does it work now for, if you like, aspiring strength coaches who are maybe students and want to get a job as a full-time club S&C in rugby?
Yeah, I mean, it is a brutal industry to be in. I mean, you just need to go onto Twitter and you see everybody shouting and tweeting about pay and how hard it is to be in the industry, and it is just, it's a tough industry to be in. It's it seems like there's two ends to it. The personal trainers, it to me, and I was chatting to a couple of my colleagues the other day about it. It seems that personal training seems to be a fallback option of a career for most people. So if you see a lot of PTs that just kind of, it will be quite an easy thing to get into. But strength and conditioning is just not an easy thing to get into. So I think they think it goes hand in hand. So just personal training and strength and conditioning go together, well, within rugby or within sports, sorry. But it's just such a brutal environment. I mean, we have internships every year, and they're amazing. The interns that we have, they're really good. Especially we got one this year, Filippo. He came over from Italy. And the previous year we had a guy, or a couple of years back, I can't remember what it was, a guy called Ren, who is now an assistant academy strength coach. And he gave up a full-time job in Italy to come over and pursue a career in strength conditioning within the UK. I mean, these guys are giving up huge, like massive sacrifices, and these guys have family and kids to get into the industry. So it's a tough place to be at the moment. But I also don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It just shows that it weans out the people that really don't want to be here. But then it also means that you have to be on top of your game the whole time. You can't have a bad season. You can't have a bad month. It's especially in the rugby, it's becoming more and more like football each and every year. So there is that worry that if you don't know your stuff, you don't perform, the team don't perform, because essentially that's all that matters. You could be the best strength coach in the world, but if the team doesn't perform, then you could be out the door. Because as we all know, fitness is the easiest thing to blame for a loss or not doing very well. So it's a tough industry, but I think it's tough and it's good. So that's kind of where my head's at with it.
And you mentioned that you look after a lot of the long-term injured players. How does that? What does that look like? Because you're doing that from the S&C perspective rather than the physio perspective. How does that kind of whole thing get packaged between you and the physios?
So we're really fortunate. We got our physiotherapy team and our strength and conditioning team as a whole. We work really well together. We've had in the past, it hasn't been as good as this, but we've got two heads of department, a guy called Mike Lancaster, who's come from the Giants in the AFL, and obviously Gaz Tong, and they gel really well. They are kind of thought processes aligned. It's not exactly the same because you wouldn't really want that. But then within that, we have a physio guy called Elliot Clark, who his whole sole job is to look after the long-term injured from date of injury to return date. And so he, as soon as myself and the guy that looks after the forwards long-term injured, as soon as a back or a forward is injured, we sit down straight away as soon as we know what the issue is, and then we outline their plan from there. And actually, this has now been going for a couple of years now, this process. It sounds really simple, but prior to it, it was a little bit messy in terms of who did what and who was looking after who, and it was hard. But now actually the process is pretty streamlined, and we sit the player down as well so that they know exactly what they're doing, because that's also half the battle. You need to educate this player and need to understand that you have to treat them like adults, and they're not just these athletes, that these objects you just look after and get back. They're in this fairly emotional state anyway, where it's a bizarre one because they're getting paid to not do their job. So you have to let them know each and every step. And it's not you're not walking through, you're not babying them, but you just I only really know rugby players, but I imagine the majority of athletes are fairly similar. They want to know what direction and what route they're taking. So us as strength coaches and physios, we've got together in Quins, and it's a fairly streamlined process now where we sit down as a group and it's a no hindsight philosophy. So we sit down with everybody, not just the long-term injured strength coaches or physios. We sit down with everybody in the performance team. We're like, right, this is let's say grade 2 hammy. How have we done this in the past? Why did it not work? Why did it work really well? What are the issues we could be facing with the player individually as well, and also with just the actual injury, in terms of have we seen 10 or 11 of them, or have we never seen a single one of them before? And then we hash it out all there. And then it's if you haven't said anything prior to it, we don't really enjoy oh, well, I told you so, or I would have done it like this. You're like, well, why didn't you say at the very beginning? So actually we get this whole process sorted there and then it runs really smoothly. So from our side, that's how we do it at Quins. Yeah.
And how early on are you involved in the process? Obviously, like day one of the injury, they get screened or assessed by the physio. How early on are you typically working with these athletes? I'm sure that depends on the injury and case by case. But
I mean, yeah, it does depend. But also, I'll be you probably, if you spoke to Elliot, probably agree. You would just nag them all the time to just try and do something with the players. Because it's an opportunity for them to progress on. Like the injured side, so let's say it's a lower body injury, especially with the backs, a lot of them struggle to maintain their upper body mass. So the second they can, depending if it's like a full surgery, they might not be allowed to sweat for a long time, or if it's just a healing process, then we might be able to get them in the gym for a bit. But their general weekly load or activity goes down just so low compared to what they normally do. So if our guys are covering 25 to 30k a week and doing 3 or 4 weight sessions and just generally being on feet a lot, they go from that to possibly doing nothing at all. So, and that doesn't sit well with me in an injury process. I want to try and keep that activity as high as possible, or as close to that, as close to their previous activity levels as possible. So as soon as the players can do something, even if it's just 3 upper body weight sessions a week and some kind of fairly moderately low intensity ab circuits, or just something to keep their activity levels up and keep them engaged, I think the sooner you can do that, the better. So I will, as soon as that's possible, I'll jump on the back of those physios and get them to hand them over to us.
So assuming there's no kind of, like you said, surgical contraindications post-op, do you find the injury can become like an opportunity where you can set targets and push their performance in other areas that you wouldn't have really had the time to?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'd probably say within the first 2 or 3 weeks, the players will always sit down in probably 3 meetings. So the first one will be with myself, and we'll sit down and outline where I think they're going, and also I think it is key to ask them if there are any issues that they want to. Not issues, if there are any areas that they'd like to push on within their physical performance. So it's if they say that this is my chance to get on top of a nagging shoulder injury, that even though it's a lower body injury that they're coming back from, this is their chance to. They say they've always had some nagging shoulder injuries, so this is our chance to really get on top of that. They'd also sit down with our head of conditioning, a guy called Tom Batchelor, and go through the off-feet goals. So we have a few tests that we're currently actually getting a list together, so we can actually have some decent tests involved. So as soon as the players get injured, what can they do in terms of, as I was saying earlier, activity levels? What fitness tests can they do? Whether it is just a standing grinder, or whether it's a ski erg, or if it's lower body, whether they can do a watt bike. They have some non-running, non-rugby related conditioning goals. So lay that out for them early doors. And then they sit down with our nutritionist, a guy called Ted Munson, and go through, obviously, what, as I keep saying, and you can probably tell it's a big thing for me, their activity levels drop right down. So that needs to be replicated within their diet as well. And then also their body composition. So where are they? This is an opportunity to push it on, or are we looking to maintain levels that they've got to? We've had a centre recently who has just got injured. He's out until March, and he got himself into a really, really good position. And he'd say it himself that his body composition probably hasn't been his forte as of recently, but he got himself in a great position. Then got injured, and actually one of the first things we spoke to him about is, look, you are where we wanted you to be body composition wise. Let's make this a real big target for you to maintain this throughout your injured period. So that's kind of as early. I think I've answered the question. I might have gone off on a massive tangent, but that's as early as we'd get them in the first week or so, and just sit them down with as many people as possible, and just it's mainly for them, I think, so that they understand that it's an important thing for everybody to get them back in the best shape possible, not just something that they're just another object for us and we're just pushing them through this turnstile. We're just trying to make everything as individual as possible. And I'd like to think that most clubs do that. I don't know. So
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think probably the athletes, assuming they haven't been injured too much before with serious injuries, their first thought is probably just, how long am I going to be doing nothing, or how long am I going to be off legs for,
exactly.
not playing rugby? But if you're on their case with targets straight away, then it probably keeps their motivation in line.
Yeah, we had one of our top wingers last April. He had ACL hamstring injury, put him out. He's still out now. He'll probably return in March, hopefully, fingers crossed. And one of the big things for us has just been getting him to do sessions off site. So not necessarily always coming into the Harlequins gym. So we've been contacting gyms around London, around Guildford, and places around where he lives, and just get him into different environments, and have different coaches take him. So one of our sports rehabilitators, a girl called Chloe, she boxes. She's an amateur boxer. So giving this winger over to Chloe to take him through boxing sessions, just something that he wouldn't normally experience within the normal schedule if he was fit and healthy. I think that's a big thing, because being injured can be unbelievably monotonous, especially if you've never been injured before. If you've been injured before, it's frustrating, but you can get your head around it because you've been through that position. But it can be brutal if you're out for 6 months or so. So just kind of, I think, changing up, and it doesn't always necessarily have to be aligned with how is this relating back to your getting you back to playing rugby. Sometimes they just need a complete break from it. And yeah, that's a big part of the injury process for us, is making sure that it's enjoyable and not monotonous for those guys.
In America, the leagues kind of have windows where the players have very restricted access to the facility, if they can even go there at all. So the players here, there's a lot of private facilities, and it's normal for the players to have their own guys in the off season. For whether that's therapy or whether that's strength and conditioning. I know you can't speak for everyone, but are you seeing a growing trend in UK sport and maybe rugby where athletes are going to other facilities privately?
Yeah, we have a few players actually who go and see men or women outside of Quins for, even if it's massage or it's extra speed work. And initially, I think 3 or 4 years ago, we were fairly hesitant towards that. It was probably an ego-driven thing for us. But actually now, as long as the person who they're going to go and see isn't doing anything crazy, it's not the end of the world. So I think you will see, and you are seeing, well, I can only speak for Harlequins, guys going and getting, I'd use expertise loosely, but you know what I mean? They'd go and see other people outside of Quins. And to me, it's not the end of the world. And our players are fairly open about it. They will ask us. So I don't know any of the players that have snuck off to see somebody. And you'd soon find out anyway, because our weekly demands on players are pretty high. So if they go from not being too tired and performing well to just looking absolutely knackered, you'd have a chat with them and you'd probably soon find out that they're doing a lot more outside. But yeah, I mean, I think you'll only see it increase. And I wouldn't say it'd be too far until some guys, especially the higher paid ones who can have more of a say, probably would probably approach clubs if they're, say, transferring to a new club and say, look, actually, I've got this physio or I've got this strength coach that I see all the time. I'd like to continue seeing them, and it might be written into their contract. I don't think we're overly far away from seeing that happen within rugby. People might disagree, but that's kind of the vibe I'm getting at the moment.
And I'm just curious, because I know you've got quite a big interest in strength and power, bit of a segue topic, and it's also not surprising that's one of your interests because you work in rugby. With regards to kind of the injured players, do you have sort of like an approach that you personally like to use for strength and power diagnostics in trying to piece together what that return to play is going to look like?
I guess it all depends on the injured site. as it were. So it's I guess upper body we don't really have any power diagnostics or power tests for upper body, because I don't think that's necessarily relevant for us. If, for example, if a shoulder injury, we would use tests like the ASH test to see if they have the ability and the intent to produce power in a short period of time, but it's not necessarily something we would be doing for the whole injured period. Lower body wise, though, we've got three tests that we would probably we've got three tests that we put our players through. A hip extension force test, which is essentially the players lying supine underneath a fixed barbell, hips at 140 degrees, heel is one leg is off the ground, one heel is on a force plate, and they try and produce as much force into that force plate as possible over a 3-second period. So it's just showing the strength of the hip extensors in a fairly sprint specific position, not necessarily. I think some people get confused and think it's a hamstring test. It's not. It's a test of the hip extensors. And we can play around with the angles to make it more hamstring dominant, less hamstring dominant. So I'd use that, for example, if somebody was coming back from a hamstring injury, you'd look at that, especially with the back, to that being in a fairly sprint specific position. That's going to be key for them for returning, being able to move at high speeds. We also use a 10 jump RSI, so single leg and bilateral. And that's just essentially just showing us the stiffness qualities in and around the ankle and the calf and the Achilles, that area. And then the last one we use is a squat jump test. So it's weighted over the barbell, empty barbell, 20, 40, 60 kilos. And that just shows us what we get from that jumping within the opta jump is the jump height, the velocity of the jump, the force produced and the power produced. Then we put that together and we can see almost like a force power deficit. And then from there, using those three, we can put together just a leg strength and power test. And then that gives us almost a menu to see where the players are lacking, if they're lacking. We don't always see that. So they're probably the three that I would say lower body wise for strength and power that we would use within the injured process. And that will come at varied times. So if somebody can start earlier, then perfect. If not, we just wait till the end, and then it's very task driven for us with our return to play criteria. And those three would probably, in terms of lower body wise, they would probably be up there with the most important three we'd have within the injured process.
Yeah, thanks. And something that springs to mind actually is, years ago when I worked in rugby, there wasn't the same use of tech in testing as there is now, whether that was at the beginning of the season or whether that was for injured players. And at the time, everybody was using a lot of movement screens, for a better word. Depending on, obviously there's different styles of tests, but that was what people were using a lot. Are they still used much in rugby, or has everything shifted a lot more technological that you've seen?
Do you know what? I think it shifted to a fairly technological biased environment, but I don't necessarily think we definitely don't overuse it. It's not that for example, we have a Nord board, so we don't, but that's not always used with hamstring injuries. But it might be used in some cases. We might not always use the hip extension test. We might not always use the RSI. So I think there's technology is available for us, but we don't hang our hat on every single one. We, again, as I mentioned earlier, when we sit down in the meeting with all the performance team, we look at, especially from an S&C point of view, probably 2 or 3 markers for the players to use when they return, or for us to use to help the players return. And we'd look at 2 or 3. I just personally think if you have 10 or so exercises or 10 or so bits of kit that you're saying, right, we're going to use all of this in the return process, I think there's some issues within that you might not always get back to the original state. You might not always get to where you want, but that might not always mean that the guy's not ready to play rugby. So yes, in answer to your question, yes, I think it is moving definitely towards us as an industry using technology a lot more. But I think that's just because that's the way of the world. The world is using more technology. It's not necessarily just our industry. And I think everything can be recorded more now. And I think it's good. I think it's allowing us to be a lot more subjective with actually how we return the players. So yes, I think it is being more technology driven, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing as such.
And very open-endedly, what's your kind of approach personally to how you develop a modern rugby player from a strength and power perspective?
I don't necessarily think you could probably just look at it as just developing a modern player just around strength and power. I think actually if you were to look at mine or Harlequins' approach in general to preparing the play, you'd probably get the answer for the strength and power question. And I think actually it all comes down to tolerance, and whether that's tolerance of load, tolerance of sessions. You need to know what your end scenario or end goal is. So say you're looking at pre-season, you might know that towards the end you want the backs or the forwards to be able to tolerate X amount of rugby sessions or X amount of unit sessions or X amount of speed or weights, whatever it is. It comes down to a question of tolerance. And then from there you work it back, and then you look at what qualities will help you or allow you to reach that goal. If you took speed training, for example, you'd start your first couple of sessions would be fairly minimal. You'd start to look at trying to increase the magnitude of the ground reaction force that you're producing. So we'd start off with smaller jump series, taking them from bilateral to unilateral. And it doesn't literally have to be week 1, week 2, week 3. That might progress over day 1, day 2, day 3, and you just slowly increase that. That would then allow you, or those sessions would then allow you to increase the rate at which you produce that ground reaction. That in turn would then decrease the inappropriate tissue loading. It would enhance dynamic joint stability and control. And then you'd look to start building sprint and change direction specific tissue tolerance. And then once you start piling them all on top of each other and you start exposing them to longer distances, so starting with 10, 20, 30, you can see how you can slowly increase this player's ability to get up to that end goal or reach that end stage that you desire within their preparation for the season. And then taking it back into the gym, probably covering the strength and power question at the beginning. In my view, that no one exercise trumps anything else. And for us, I know that we work with a rotation of bilateral lifts. So some guys can't always squat, and we're definitely not married to the squat as well. So we might use a belt squat with them. We might use a leg press. It doesn't necessarily matter. I think it is key to get a decent amount of force through the legs bilaterally. And then the rotation of single leg work. So whether that's the rotation of hamstring work that we do, so we might go with we go through range hip extension, we might go knee dominant, we might go hip dominant. So we would utilize exercises such as Nordic curls, single leg hip extensions on glute ham. We'd use the more basic exercises such as RDLs, and then we'd go through step ups. We'd go through single leg press. For us, it's just the rotation of the exercises, exposing players to different strengths and different ranges. And then if you're looking at the upper body, for me, that's even more of a simple answer. These guys need to have the muscle mass around to be able to deal with the amount of contact they're going to be doing towards the end of pre-season and definitely within season. And some of the guys just need extra sessions here and there to maintain that size. But again, we rotate the exercises, we horizontal, vertical, push, pull, and then working a lot around the shoulder and a lot around the upper back. And as I said, it's a game of mass and it's a game of size. So you need to be having positive collisions and positive contacts. So then body weight comes into it, and then that's where, once you've got all the weight room stuff sorted, that's where the nutritionist comes into play. And that's where the guys would sit down with Ted Munson, our nutritionist, and work out the best way to maintain a positive size for the guys, because just lump size is no good for anybody, because fat's not doing anything for you. So you need to be carrying decent muscle, decent size into these collisions to have a positive effect and help the team out. And I think once you've got all of those systems in place, you've got a pretty decent preparation for a modern day rugby player. Now, ask me again in a year's time and the game would have completely changed, and might have a completely different philosophy. And also there'll be lots of things that I haven't mentioned, but that question alone could turn into a half an hour answer. But I think it just, as I said at the very beginning of this question, I think it comes down to knowing what the player needs to tolerate, and whether that's pre-season, in-season, knowing what is the demand for them, and then working back from there.
No, completely. When you're in pre-season, it's probably more normal to have clearly identified phases of training, whether that's hypertrophy, strength, power, and how you progress through those. When you're in, say, mid-season and you're rotating the lifts, what prompts you to change the lift, if you like, from, say, a squat to a deadlift? Is it when you see a plateau, or do you have arbitrary timeframes that you keep those lifts in rotation for?
To be honest, it's arbitrary timeframes. It's not that there's any plateaus as such that are reached for our guys. We definitely now don't take the standpoint of the season is just maintaining. I really don't like that when we say that they use pre-season to build the muscle and the strength and the power, and then in season it's just maintaining. I think now we try and consistently push people on, and that's why I think we tend to use 5 to 6 week periods, and that's just so that firstly you're not going to plateau in 5 or 6 weeks. I don't think, unless you're starting on week 1, you're maxing out and you're trying to do each week. You're not going to plateau in 5 or 6 weeks. So actually it allows them to just really slowly progress, still lifting some decent weight, and then just consistently changing. And also, don't forget, these guys are in a 40, 42 week season. So if you were to stick them on the squat for 12 to 20 weeks straight, that would probably be quite boring for them. So there's also the variety aspect that comes into play when we're thinking about programming. So not necessarily, it doesn't always have to be research driven or journal driven. It's actually comes down to these players are going to get really bored, so let's just rotate around. And the lifts are chosen with specific ideas in mind. So we don't just be like, oh, let's just pick out these lower body lifts. We think about what's going to be helpful for us. For example, we might use a high box step up if guys aren't exposed to deep flexion with bilaterally or unilaterally. So we'd use a high box step up, especially with, I know we've used it in the past with locks, with the guys who are really tall, who actually, if they're going to squat, they'd struggle to get that deep and get strength training in that range. So then a single leg high box step up will be used for them and might be rotated. Then we might go back to a single leg press where we wouldn't necessarily worry too much about range, but it would just be about getting as much load through the leg as possible in the best range possible. So that's kind of the thought process behind the rotation.
So you've got a pretty flexible approach as to what lifts and why each player has.
Definitely. I mean, there's some guys that just won't touch the squat. They can't. I think some of them would just loading up their spine. They might have previous back injuries, their hip injuries, and there will be some guys that won't do certain lifts. So a lot of our front row will have toe issues. So doing a split squat won't be the best. So maybe a Bulgarian split squat where the rear foot's elevated is the best for them. So they just, maybe their exercise menu is a bit smaller, but we do try to rotate a lot of guys on certain lifts.
I think the industry's moved on now, hasn't it, from there being lifts that you absolutely have to do for a sport.
Oh God, yeah, definitely. I was chatting to actually an ex-England female player this morning, and I think I might be doing a bit of training with her, and she was worried when she was telling me what she was doing. She said that she was worried she can't squat anymore, and she's worried she can't snatch. And I was like, you're 33 years old. I mean, you're going to be doing well to be getting to 33 in professional rugby and not have any issues and be able to do all exercises. I mean, 90% of our guys probably couldn't clean because of the wrist injuries they have or the shoulder injuries. So I think I think as a strength coach going into it, you'd like to think you could throw this battery of exercises at players and they can do everything and anything. But I think realistically, you're going to be changing day to day most exercises. I mean, that's the majority of our Monday is spent talking to players when they come into the gym and finding what they can and can't do. So, I mean, if you go in there with this idea that it's going to be in this nice linear progression of these 15 different exercises throughout the year, I mean, you're harshly mistaken. So,
for your players that are on the international books, how much sort of influence do the international S&C coaches have on their program year round?
I'd like to say none, but there's an influence in terms of it's just the England or the Eddie Jones influence, and that's not a bad thing. But players, if you go up to a young player and Eddie Jones has told him that he needs to be quicker or bigger, he's not going to turn around and go, well, Quins don't believe that. So I mean, there's got to be a bit of push and pull from both sides. They wouldn't sit that the strength and conditioning coaches wouldn't sit down with our head of performance and such and say, like, this is exactly what we want them to do, because it's not a centrally contracted sport at the moment within England. So they don't have much say in terms of what the players do. They definitely have a say in how the players think. So they will definitely chat to them and say, look, this needs to be improved. You're not going to, maybe the strength coaches wouldn't be as harsh as to say you're not going to play for England if this doesn't improve, but they definitely give them a hard time in certain areas. And hey, you can't blame them for that, and you can't blame the players for wanting to listen to them and improve. But essentially, the physical preparation of the player is driven and led by Harlequins.
Yeah.
So yeah,
and I'm sure you've got probably quite a good relationship with England because it's because of the proximity. But do you have relationships with many other international S&C coaches for similar reasons?
Yeah. If you to be honest, I don't have a huge amount of contact with the England strength coaches. It's definitely above my pay grade. So I don't have a huge amount. I would chat to them every so often. I know the ex S&C for England, guy called Dean Benton, came in and spent a lot of time with players such as Mike Brown and Danny Kerr, and he seemed to put a lot of effort in, and the players really liked that and respected that. And I think he's now at Australia. But in terms of other countries, it all kind of depends on the players we have. So I know I've had a few conversations with some Fijian coaches and Samoan coaches, but I guess it depends on who we have in our squad. I mean, ideally, you want guys that are on the verge of internationals but not playing international, because then you'd never lose them. But at the moment, it tends to just be the England S&C that our coaches higher up have a bit more contact with.
Yeah. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, mate. On like a day-to-day basis, let's just say kind of mid-season, what are the kind of bigger challenges that you face as an S&C coach working in rugby?
Do you know what? I wouldn't say it's too tough of a job in terms of challenges. I guess 3 or 4 years ago, probably had you asked me this, I would have probably given you this answer and it'd been a bit more frantic in terms of we wouldn't have had a system set in place. But day to day, it's just making sure the right players are on the pitch to train. You don't always need to force them out onto the field. Like it's the Saturday that counts. Having said that, you need the numbers on the field to train. So making sure the players are fit and ready, and also sometimes you can get them on the field and get through training because you need the numbers there. So for us, making sure that we choose the right things to do in the gym and on speed work is the most important thing. I wouldn't say there are too many other challenges as such. I'd like to say that I'm running around and it's all frantic and I'm juggling lots of different balls. But I mean, actually, at the moment, we've got a really nice system in place where in the morning we meet with the physios and we talk through any short-term injured players and any issues we think we might have with players going into that day, whether they're non-contact, whether they're full contact, whether actually today he's going to be what we would call load managed. So maybe he wouldn't do any running, he might not do any extra fitness that we do after training. And then it also depends on the day of the week, because we structure our training around 3 set days. So we have a build on a Monday, which is building from the weekend. You'll see a pattern in here where all the names of the day. So building from the weekend, and we look back at how the Saturday and Sunday went, and it's very low level. So in terms of perceived effort, it would be around 30%. And then on the Tuesday, it would be what we'd call a fast session, or the second day of training would be a fast session. So the rest periods are higher, but each period within rugby is done at full pace, not necessarily a huge amount of contact. And then again, that's replicated in the strength work that we do. So with the backs, that's probably one of their main days for speed with us, whether that's in a linear based environment or whether that's actually we put it into a game specific environment prior to rugby. So we might do some one-on-ones, we might do some, if it's with the back three, they might do some catch and then counter attack with some at least 30 or 40 meters of max velocity work. And then within the sideline conditioning on that Tuesday, if the guys aren't involved in a rugby, it would all be based around trying to get that high meters per minute, high speed running. And then the third day of training is what we'd call a hard. And it's probably fairly obvious what that's going to be. Is a decent amount of contact. It's a lot of off the ground work. So again, anybody that's off a couple of plays, he'd be doing a lot of contact, a lot of down ups or burpees, or whatever anybody wants to call them. And actually, probably thinking about getting a higher volume of running, maybe not a huge amount more, but the high speed work wouldn't be as important for us. Not that we neglect it, but that probably wouldn't be a main focus. And then in the gym, that would most likely be where they'd get their upper body day in. So you don't want to take a huge amount out of their legs, because we know that the rest periods are going to be short within rugby. And then that's in terms of the physical preparation of the week, that would be where we would end. And then they have a day off, and then on the Friday it goes into a sharpen, so almost an old school captain's run, as it were. So that's minimal work. Then it's the game. So that's kind of I know I've gone off on a tangent, but day to day the challenges aren't huge, and I think that's because we've got a decent process set in play. But that's kind of how the week is structured, and you can see that now that we've done 2 years under Paul Gustard now with that structure of training, and it actually makes it very simple and easy to coordinate the physio and the S&C departments day by day.
Yeah, it sounds like the systems are a lot more predictable to some extent and robust. I think the American sports have some of the American sports are like a traveling circus. I think they have a hard job coordinating everything and delaying certain days of their weekly plan, and then another week a game just gets chucked in on them. And
and sometimes it's, if we go from a Sunday to a Friday game, the week's going to change. So I guess you'd have challenges in terms of, right, okay, how are we going to structure this? Are we going to say, look, there's no lower body sessions this week, and that's not the end of the world. Again, we're not married to you always have to do a lower body lift or you always have to do an upper body lift. It's a long season. You'll get chances. We're really lucky that Paul Gustard rotates a lot of players. So we know, for example, maybe we might have 2 or 3, unless there's any major injuries, we might have 2 or 3 weeks with a guy where he's probably not going to play rugby at the weekend. So firstly, what are we going to do to keep his fitness levels up? But actually, secondly, this is a real good chance for us to get some decent strength work in. So yeah, I mean, there are challenges in that, but we are lucky that there's a fairly set structure. It can go a bit haywire. You throw a couple of losses in there, and it might change a little bit, but all in all, 90% of the time, it follows this set structure, which is good.
And you mentioned then the kind of differentiators between each day and each session in terms of collisions, distance, speeds, accelerations. Are you kind of live on the data when they're doing those sessions, or do you have sports scientists at hand with you?
Well, our head of sports scientists, who's also our head of fitness or condition, whatever you want to call it, Tom Batchelor, he has it all live there, but we're all radioed up. So, for example, if I'm the other side of the pitch running a guy, or if I'm the other side of the pitch taking an injured player, we have constant feedback in terms of how far he's going. So if it's a return to rugby run, for example, actually I hate that term. So if it's just an injured run or a returning run, then I know that if I've got a volume of say 3 to 4K, or I want to get him to hit a certain top speed, we can always just radio in, and Batch will tell us straight away. So it is live there, and it's very easy for us to kind of coordinate and control what players do and don't do. And as I said at the beginning of the day, if we've decided that somebody is load managed, as we coin that term, then we know exactly when they hit that arbitrary number that we've chosen, whether it might be dependent on the age of the player, the injury, anything that is, we can always get live feedback straight away.
It's pretty sophisticated, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's funny, you would, within, I think in the general public, yes, it is sophisticated. And if you can get stuck in that process where you're like, oh, everybody must have GPS and they must have this to be able to rely upon. And actually, when you speak to other strength coaches, maybe in say like the championship or just maybe other PTs, there is fairly impressive. So yeah, it is fairly sophisticated.
Yeah.
It's good.
How much information do you guys are you able to collect on the guys away from the field? Because I know that really varies in sports and team to team. Are you able to know their sleep in an in-depth level or anything else like that, or is it kind of when they come in the morning?
Yeah, so we have every morning, every single morning, so Monday to Sunday, the guys fill out a wellness questionnaire, and it's how did you sleep, how sore are you feeling, and how ready are you feeling, and then from that it just sparks conversations. And then it took a while for us to understand how people scored themselves. Obviously, you can't just day one, if somebody says they had a bad sleep, you can't just jump on it and say, right, we need to sort your sleep out, because their bad sleep might be 8 hours, whereas somebody else's bad sleep might be 4 hours. So it took us a while to kind of get used to that process, maybe 6 to 7 months or so. And now actually we just use it to spark conversations. And I guess it actually relates back to your question earlier about technology. And this is an example of us using it, but not relying on it. So we use it to have chats and conversations with the players. So, for example, if Joe Bloggs scores himself really low in readiness and really high in tiredness, that would then allow me, when he comes in, I can start talking to him straight away. And actually, it might just be that he woke up feeling bad, and actually now he's feeling a lot better. So that's how we vaguely know what you're never going to fully know what the players do off site. But that kind of is one of the ways that we like to track it. These guys also, as well, they get some of the higher profile players are on feet a lot. They have to go and do appearances. They might, if they're injured during match day, they might have to go and do box appearances. They might go and see sponsors. So it's just, you just have to talk to them. I mean, you can have all the technology in the world, but if you don't speak to somebody, it's never gonna get sorted.
Yeah, and I guess you almost don't want to extend the technology and the monitoring too close to home for them, because they've got to have life away from rugby as well.
Oh, 100%. A lot of these have young families, and the last thing they want to be doing is filling out questionnaires 24/7. So that's why we try to make it as simple as possible. It's on their phone. Every single one of them is going to wake up straight away and go on Twitter or on Instagram or messages or whatever. So why not spend literally 2 minutes filling out a questionnaire, which then can help us massively. And I think what has helped is that when players in the past have said that they're feeling tired or they're not feeling good, we've changed the day if it's needed. So it's not just, and I think a lot of sports scientists and a lot of strength coaches get a decent amount of stick from players from just being data driven. But I think if you use it wisely and use it to their advantage, and it actually has some effect on, it feels like you're listening through the data as such, then I think the players will massively buy into it.
Yeah, I haven't met many athletes yet that enjoy looking at Microsoft Excel.
Oh God, Jesus! I mean, I hate looking at Microsoft Excel, so I imagine they do. So.
I mean, you still definitely get some coaches who live by Excel and hide behind it a little bit. I think too much. So it's nice to hear that you've got everything at your disposal that you need, but the relationships and the communication kind of trumps it. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I think we're fortunate that the actual club environment is a very open environment. I know that there are definitely some clubs, because I've been to a couple of clubs abroad and in the UK, that it is closed shop with players and strength coaches. It's a very business relationship, whereas I'd say we're friendly colleagues. That's probably the best way to put it. We're friendly. We're definitely not friends with the players. Like you probably wouldn't be going out with them as such, but they're not afraid to question or ask us, and we're definitely not afraid to call them out on certain things. So we're really fortunate in that environment.
I mean, hearing you say that actually, and what you were saying earlier about how the rehab team is assembled around the player, there seems like there's a lot of overlap with you guys between kind of this Altis model of the performance therapy triad, where you've got the coach, the therapist, and the player in kind of equal measures related to each other.
Oh, definitely. I mean, first and foremost, it's the player that's returning. So we've got a lot of very outspoken players in our environment, so they're not afraid to say they do or don't believe this, or they just question a lot, which is really good. At first, when I started the long-term rehab role, it really worried is the wrong term, but they would question everything, and that made me question myself. And it wasn't actually that they didn't believe in it; they're just very inquisitive. which has actually made me a better coach, because now when I plan anything, I plan every single part of the training with the idea that they're going to ask a question about every single part of the training, and I need to have a reason. And it's made me a lot better coach because I now think about everything. I used to listen when I was a younger strength coach. That sounds kind of rude, but I'm only 32. So when I a couple of years ago when I was a strength coach, I would have thought, God, I don't think about every single aspect of my training or every single aspect of programming. But now I genuinely do, because I know that players will say, why am I doing this? Why? But last week I was doing this and now I'm doing this. Why am I now running a week later instead of today when you said I was going to? And you need to have an answer for everything. Or sometimes you don't have an answer for everything and you let them know. You don't know why this has happened. You don't know why they're getting pain, or you don't know why the run's not progressing as quickly as you do. So it's kind of, I think you have to be confident in what you're doing, but also showing sometimes that you don't know what's going on is helpful as well.
I think it shows almost greater confidence to say you don't know why rather than try and blag it.
100%. Yeah, 100%. You can see in my life, like everybody can see if somebody asks you a question and you just blag your way through for 5 minutes talking, you're like, come on, you just say you don't know and they'll respect you a lot more.
Yeah.
So
yeah, because that reasoning could come back to haunt you if you're inconsistent with your reasoning as well.
And 9 times out of 10, when you give that answer, you probably forget the answer you've given. So when they don't forget, they will question you on it. So.
And it sounds to me like you probably get a ton of education from the way that your team's just set up, multidisciplinary wise. Is there any way you kind of turn to or look for your continuing education, or any resources that you use outside of Quins?
I mean, Quins are very big on CPD, especially within the strength and conditioning team. Our head, Gareth Tong, is massive on making sure we go out and go to other clubs or other sports. So actually, personally, I've been to when I took on the long-term injury role, I tried to look around rugby and saw who had the best long-term injured process, and actually, it fell on Leinster Rugby. So I went and spent 2 or 3 days with Leinster Rugby with a guy called Dermot over there, who's their long-term injured strength coach, and that was a real eye-opener and a good kickstart for me in my new role. And then outside of that, I visited GB bobsleigh. I wanted to look around and say, like, what sports do you need to produce the most speed and most power? And I thought, well, bobsleigh, they've got 10 meters to push a heavy object as fast as they can, and then they sit down in it. They need to still maintain the weight per person because you have to have a set weight. So I went to them and had a look at how they did things. And then Altis is a big thing for us. We've done a few of their speed courses. We're looking to hopefully go out there with a couple of our guys next year for some warm weather training in the fallow week. And then actually it's just about, I reach out to a lot of strength coaches on Instagram and on Twitter and just ask questions. I'm never afraid to ask questions to people. So that's a big thing. We're also unbelievably fortunate to have a guy called James Wild who programs our speed. So he does the overview of speed, and then myself and Gareth deliver the majority of it. He will deliver some sessions, but we're really fortunate. He's probably one of the top speed coaches in the world. And we've got him looking over our speed program and programming it. So that's a huge resource that's just literally next door to us. So that's been a big help for me personally, taking on this new role. So yeah, I've been very fortunate.
And do you guys still have Adam Bishop at the club?
Yeah, he's still gaining weight daily. He is he's there. He's head of strength. And then he programs for the forwards. So he is there. He's eating like a horse at the moment and trying to get ready for World's Strongest Man. So yeah, he is grumpy as ever.
I mean, that must get huge buy-in if you're a player trying to get strong and he's your strength coach.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, the players like it. I think he walks around lifting stuff. I mean, it's a big thing for everybody, really. To be honest, I mean, having him around is good for the environment all the time. And he's always competing. It's always good to see what he's lifting. He's never shy of a heavy lift or so. I think he's got a decent deadlift. I don't know what it is, but it's decent. So yeah.
And I've heard on another podcast that you were at some stage performing hundreds of pull-ups a day. Are you still on that pursuit?
Oh yeah, I've got a weird obsession with pull-ups. I don't know where that came from. Yeah, I probably died down a little bit, mainly because my shoulder probably hurts more from doing hundreds of pull-ups. but yeah, no, I'm still just banging them out left, right, and centre. So it's probably a weird thing for anybody to see, but yeah, I'm still doing that.
No, I love that. I thought that was a great quirky fact when I heard you tell somebody about that.
I just like the pull up or the chin up as you can't be overweight, you can't be weak in it, and it exposes a lot of weaknesses if people can't do pull ups. So that's why I think that's where I've got my obsession from.
No, it's good. Where can people follow you online on the social media powers that be?
Probably Instagram's my main thing. So I actually use Instagram now as almost a platform to show what we're doing at work. So it's definitely not a personal Instagram. So it's just Ed Lee 87, and I just try and post as much as possible about what the guys are doing, mainly the injured guys, and just videos and a bit of information about their process and why we do certain things. So that's the best place to find me.
Yeah, that's really transparent of you as well. And thank you very much for being so transparent today on the show and giving everybody a great insight to what you do and how you do it.
No worries, I tend to blab a little bit, so some of it might not make sense, but hopefully it helps.
No, it's been perfect. I think we're on the clock there, mate. But yeah, thanks again, and it's been great to hear from you and find out a bit more about what you do.
No worries, thank you for having me.
Thanks. Cheers, Ed.
Cheers, Andy.
Big thank you to Ed Lee for coming on the show today and walking us through both his and Harlequins' approach to physical prep and rehab within rugby. As usual, the episode will have show notes that you can find at informperformance.com. But don't forget, we can also be found on Twitter at InformPod or Instagram at InformPerformance. To give you a little spoiler alert and something to look forward to, next week you can listen to a conversation between myself and Lauren Johnson, the mental conditioning coach at the New York Yankees. Thanks for listening.